The Safavids also had a massive persecution against the Sunnis. So, like that video just kind of covered, there was this huge divide because they were Shia. They took on the policy of convert or die. They demanded that all people become Shia Muslims within their community, and if you did not, the punishment was simply death. So they are the complete opposite of a lot of things that we see in the other empires that we've talked about in terms of religious toleration, and that there is none. They will not tolerate any religion at all. They use Shia as a means of ruling the people. So they used hard line religious rules and laws built around everything that is Shia Islam. So that was hands down their most distinguishing feature. They're going to become kind of the building block for what would later be the foundation of the Shia rule all throughout the Middle East. Twelver Shiism is what they believe in, and it essentially is the belief that 12 imams are the successors of Muhammad. One of them, Mahdi, will return with Jesus at the end of the world to fight the Antichrist, and will ultimately be there for the apocalypse. Prior to the Safavids, Iran was prominently a Sunni region, but after them, it will not be. And I don't know if you saw it at the top line here, but the Safavids don't really show up much in the curriculum, so they're not going to be that big of a deal. The Ottomans even sent their Islamic scholars, the ulama, to train in Iran at their madrasas. So make sure that you do remember that. The Sufi madrasa network that Ibn Battuta mentioned in his actual travels and everything else, that is going to matter. The religious schooling network here is going to be a big deal. In the decade that it took Ismail to consolidate all the power that he got, he worked tirelessly to replace Sunni Islam with 12 Shia, and essentially did it for a couple of reasons. Ideological uniformity. He wanted everyone to believe the same things. He wanted to contrast with the rival Ottomans. He felt like if they could get the religion to also be the opposite, then that would naturally lead to more people hating the Ottomans and their empire. And conversion was part of a forced recognition of Safavid legitimacy. By them coming in, if they forced you to convert and change your religion, it guarantees that you clearly recognize that they are in charge. The way they did this was pretty simple. Literally, they would line people up, force them to convert, make them declare their, we'll say, ideology in front of people, so that way they were all held accountable. And they would force habitual cursing of the first three caliphs, which, if you were a Sunni Muslim, would be kind of a big deal that you don't do. You wouldn't get up there and just curse all of the original people that you believed helped found your religion, right? So they would force that to happen. They caused destruction and destroyed Sunni mosques, which again, not ideal for the Sunnis that lived there. And they invited Shia outside of Iran to move there for protection. So in other words, they said, hey, if you are a Shiite anywhere else in the world, you can come here and we will help protect you. So did Ismail's efforts to convert Iran to Shiism work? Oh yeah. 90 to 95% of all Muslims that are in the Middle East currently, so this is modern day, right? So this is as of 2017. 90 to 95% of the population of Iran is Shiite. 65 to 70% of the population of Iraq is Shiite. So when it comes to his goal of getting all Shiites to unite in one area, he definitely succeeded. Qizilbash is any number of Shia militants, mostly Turkish people, who helped found the Safavid Empire. They were fanatically loyal to Shah Ismail. They practically worshipped him, and they developed rivalries with Persians, or the men of the pen, right? So they essentially were all about warfare, didn't really care about writing things down. After the Battle of Caldrian, their loyalty and power very much waned because, well, they lose. And if you're going to worship the person who is leading you because you think that he is unstoppable and impenetrable and all these other things, then he loses a fight. Well, you kind of stop listening to him as much. You can see their headdresses. That's going to be the differentiating factor, and especially the little golden pins and the little red hats that kind of stick out underneath them. That's going to be their distinguishing feature. Right? You can also see the tunics they have there, but you can notice they stick out more than the others. They're going to be the elite members of the military. They are going to be the gun wielders. So while others may only have bows and arrows and spears, they're going to get to be the ones with the guns. So if I gotta update this, if the football team have the Cowboys instead of the Redskins here, if the Yankees have the Red Sox, Clemson's got Alabama, but for the Safavids, well, they've got the Ottomans. And as we can look down the line here, they don't start out very well against them. In the first set of wars against the Ottomans, the winner comes out being Ottoman. They don't win a war until the War of 1603, and that's going to be whenever Ahmed faces off against the Abbas. So when this occurs, Mesopotamia and East Anatolia go over to the Safavids, but it doesn't last for long. The Ottomans come along right after that. They take it over, and they set the border for what would become modern-day Iran and Iraq. After that, we have a little bit of a stalemate with some Safavid people taking control. But ultimately, even though they win, there's a little bit of an asterisk there. So Afghans strike to take back the land from the Safavids, and the Safavid Empire, as it is, like as a whole, basically is done. It no longer exists under the singular Shah, and instead it has a leader now, but it's no longer the same line or the same dynasty that essentially was what the Safavids were. So, moving on from the Safavids, we're going to move further east, and we're going to go into India now. So, previously in India, we had a whole lot of things happening, right? So we had the Rajput kingdoms, we had the Delhi Sultanate, we had the Vajranara Empire. We had Delhi and the Rajput kingdoms there, like I said. But ultimately, whenever it comes to India, basically Islam was entering in, and the Delhi Sultanate had taken over, right? So we got lots of death, destruction to temples. Cool.
So the Mughals were Muslims who created an empire in India that held power for roughly 200 years between the early 16th and early 18th centuries, although technically the Mughal Empire didn't come to an end until after the Indian Rebellion against the British in 1857. Now the Mughals weren't the first Muslims in India, those would have been merchants, and they weren't even the first Muslims to rule significant parts of India. That honor goes to the Delhi Sultanate, which began in 1206 in northern India. But the Delhi Sultanate didn't last very long, and it was replaced by a bunch of regional kingdoms, and one of them, the Lodi Sultanate, had the misfortune of falling to the founder of the Mughal dynasty, Babur, in 1526. Not Babar, although that would have been awesome. Babur was descended from Timur, the last great Central Asian conqueror in the Mongol tradition, and also from Chinggis Khan, which explains why Babur and his followers are called the Mughals. It's the Persian Arabic word for Mongols. Now I know what you're saying, something like 12% of human beings currently living in the world are descended from Chinggis Khan, but Babur got it on the ground floor of it. Anyway, I think we have some footage of Babur raiding the Lodi Sultanate, don't we, Stan? Nah, I don't feel like that was actual file footage from 1206. I feel like that was a racist Hercules movie from Italy in the 1950s. So the Mughal Empire is really important in India's cultural history. I mean, the Taj Mahal was built during this time. In architecture and painting, we see a blending of Indian and Persian styles that demonstrate how cosmopolitan the empire was. But probably the most important aspect of the Mughals, at least as far as the contemporary world is concerned, is that they consolidated Muslim rule over much of India, and they're largely the reason that today there are so many Indians who are also also Muslims. And the Mughals were also a really interesting example of like how to build and maintain an empire. All right, let's go to the thought bubble. Muslims were a small minority ruling class vastly outnumbered by Hindus, and like many empires, they relied on military power and pursued expansionist policies. Like most of the Mughal rulers, especially Akbar and Aurangzeb, spent a considerable amount of time trying to extend Mughal control over the entire Indian subcontinent, and they created a pretty effective empire. They were able to incorporate Indian princes into the ruling class while still retaining top positions for Muslims. They reorganized the bureaucracy and instituted an effective tax collection system, which was important because the empire was, of course, very expensive to run, as empires always are. This meant it was important to make accurate tax assessments, and taxes were usually collected by local leaders called zamindars. Taxes had to be paid in cash, and this contributed to the growing commercialization of the Mughal Empire. Reliance on zamindars, who were important men in their communities, meant that the empire could collect revenue without being too disruptive to local village life. And although almost all of the revenue came from taxes on agriculture, the Mughals also taxed trade. Another way that the Mughals were a typical empire is that their rulers engaged in building projects to enhance their prestige. From Persepolis to Rome to the Forbidden City, building monuments to one's greatness is what emperors do, and the Mughals were no exception. As Muslims, many of their building projects were mosques, but the Mughals also built forts and, most spectacularly, mausoleums.
Which is what brings us to some of the most famous mausoleums. And we'll look at those in a little bit here. So, like it said so nicely there by John Green, the first emperor was Babur. And he comes along, and I wish that I had pictures of him, but the PowerPoint wouldn't load the pictures for whatever reason. And so he actually did pop up in chapter 8 of the book. But like it said, his mom was directly related to Genghis Khan. His dad directly related to Tamerlane. He's very much got a family history of, well, conquerors. So he was an Uzbek leader who lost in Central Asia and turned to India. Ultimately, he is the founder, but he dies 4 years after founding it. So he's most known for taking down the Delhi Sultanate in the Battle of Panipat. The military significance here is that it's the first use of firearms and artillery in India, and whenever he uses them, the biggest, kind of most significant purpose is it completely scares away all of the elephants. That's a real thing. He scared the war elephants all away, so that way they would all simply go running. And once all the war elephants were gone, well, all of a sudden the cavalry that they have aren't really significant. It helps that they have guns and the people they're fighting don't. Babur's grandson, Akbar, might be the mightiest of all the Mughals. He tripled the size of the empire and had power over birds. Not really, but he was essentially a king of falconry, and he preferred sparrowhawks, but essentially he learned how to use birds of prey to hunt down not only other things and to collect meat and things like that, but he would actually use his birds to attack people. So he had trained falcons that literally would come down and attack his enemies. And he helped with he hunted with thousands of hunting cheetahs. They would go out, they had trained cats, which literally were cheetahs to track down and run people down. Now, although Akbar is kind of the mightiest emperor here, he's not also without his own controversy because, well, most of the things that he hunted with those cheetahs were people. They were religiously tolerant, so they didn't really care what religion you were, and we'll talk about kind of that for quite some time here. But when it comes down to all of like the things that they did, religious toleration is going to be the biggest and most probably significant thing about the Mughals. They were Sunnis. His tutors had been Shias, though, so he was very much skilled and learned in the different forms of Islam. But his main policy was that there would be harmony between Hindus and Muslims. At the time, the Mughals rule over a quarter of the Earth's population because they rule over all of India, but ultimately they needed to find a way to balance that relationship. So since most of India was Hindu, well, it makes sense to have some harmony between them, so that way your people aren't constantly fighting with, well, your own people. He invited all religions to come and debate the benefits of each faith. And that included, but was not limited to, Sunni, Shias, Sufis, Zoroastrians, Hindus, Sikhs, Jains, Jews, Jesuits, atheists. But he preferred Sufism. Um, he built the Abdat Khana, or the House of Worship, and he combined the outcomes of these debates into a new faith, the religion of God, aka the divine faith. It promoted tolerance, and very much kind of resulted in him marrying a Hindu princess, because he no longer kind of viewed that as a boundary between unification here. He turned the Mughal Empire into a liberal, completely secular state. Um, by the way, there's a word we haven't seen on the previous slide. Anybody notice it? Sikhism. You thought we were done with religions? Not a chance. It's a monotheistic religion founded by the Guru Nanak. Um, their followers are called Sikhs, or students, and essentially everything is following the Akka, and it's the wisdom of the Guru. It's mainly in the Punjab region of India, and that's the only part of the world that is actually a Sikh majority. Its beliefs essentially are that there's the same God for all religions. It condemns blind ritual. So, in other words, you don't just follow things, you have to actually understand that everything. Everyone is considered equal by race and gender. Women are allowed to participate. And it's kind of a blending of Islam and Hinduism into one. The Golden Temple here. It's the holy place in Sikhism where the holy book is housed. And when all is said and done, it comes in at number 9 in terms of the top 10 largest religions. So there's the Golden Temple. The Sikhs follow the 10 gurus or teachers, but the 11th and the eternal guru is the Guru Granth Sahib. It's their holy text and the eternal living guru. It is housed in the Golden Temple. There is no Hindu nor any Musliman. So that's the statement of the first guru after God visited him by the river.